Thank you so much for being here so bright and early and coming to this talk, which is called The Art of Time Travel and Other Mysteries of a Creative Life. So this talk is not in chronological order, so I'm going to be consulting my notes just so that I don't forget anything and it doesn't get even more confusing than it already is. So I am a visual artist. I am based here in St. Louis. Is my mic not working?
That one is for your recording. This one's for your humans.
Oh, hi. Okay, thank you. Put this down. Okay. But my art journey started a long time ago in a place far away. Okay, maybe not so long ago, but kind of long ago. I was born and raised in the Philippines. This was my first art show. In 1983, I was 11, and my grandmother and I got to exhibit together. So that is her in that painting over there. This picture was taken here, in the neighborhood that I grew up in Manila. This is where I took art classes, so this was like our version of Coca. And 2 years after that picture was taken, I moved to the US. So I graduated with a degree in art theory and practice from Northwestern. And although I've always loved making art, I haven't always identified as an artist. I had that model minority myth to contend with, and it wasn't that I felt any pressure from my family to be a nurse or a doctor, but I did feel like they sacrificed a lot for me to pursue my education here. So I actually started out at Northwestern pre-law in the School of Speech, which didn't really work for me. So I took all of these art classes as electives until I pretty much had to declare art as a major in order to graduate. But I did graduate, and then at that point I had to choose between enrolling in the School of the Art Institute for grad school or to take that entry-level position at the agency. I chose the agency primarily because I was tired of subsisting on day-old Jimmy John's bread. But after that, I never went back. I thought I would defer grad school for a year, but that didn't happen. So for the next 30 years, all of my professional energy was really devoted to advertising, marketing, and design. I know some of you from that chapter of my life when I was a graphic designer, and I was managing a design firm, and I was on the board of AIGA here in St. Louis. So all along, I also basically got married, raised some children, got divorced, lived life. Lived life here in St. Louis, which really wasn't on my radar as a 13-year-old transplant from the Philippines. My college boyfriend was from here. It was the usual, St. Louis boomerang story. All the while, I was still making things, personal things like illustrations of my kids and portraits of people's pets. And I made jewelry with my art that I actually sold at retailers across the country. But in 2017, my grandparents' house in the Philippines was sold. So they passed in the early 2000s, but because their house was sold, I inherited a family archive of photos. And it was such a treasure trove of material. From that point on, I pretty much stopped painting animals. What struck me most about these pictures was that they were full of stories. It was not just my family's story, but how they intersected with history. My grandparents were separated by World War II. My grandmother lived through the Japanese occupation of Manila. My grandfather was conscripted to the US Army while he was in grad school, so he was developing chemical weapons. Post-war, my grandmother was hired by the US Army because she spoke English so well, this is a theme in my family, to be a guide through the city as they were delivering supplies after the fall of Manila. So this is Major Harold Clark, and this is the Jeep that he would pick her up in every day. So this is a letter that my grandfather wrote in 1945. I'm going to see, can I make it bigger? I can. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I will try to project even more.
No, you just weren't.
No? Oh, okay. So this is the letter from my grandfather who said, I was born in Manila. I was educated at the University of the Philippines as well as at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In addition to my technical qualifications, I speak Spanish, Tagalog, and Visayan. And basically, he's thoroughly familiar with the Philippines, and I believe that my assignment to this duty would not only be in the best interests of the government, but would also be the most logical assignment to duty for me. So he spent the entirety of the war in Boston and wasn't sent back after the war until after the war was over, which was probably a good thing since 1 million Filipinos died in that war. From the moment that I got these pictures, I devoted my art practice to family portraits because I realized that unless I made them visible, these stories could be lost forever. And in my mind, I had no expectation that they would have an audience beyond my own descendants. So one of the images in the collection was this one of me right after college with my grandmother and Emma, who was my grandfather's sister. We spent a lot of Sundays at Lolo Arturo and Lola Emma's house. My very first dog portrait was this one, which was Lola Emma's dog. The school that I attended in the Philippines was a private parochial school that went from pre-K through college. So while I was in elementary school, Lola Emma taught college math and physics. So after my school was done, I would go over to her classroom sometimes and hang out with her. They didn't have any kids, so she became kind of bonus mom to a whole generation of Unsons, my dad and his siblings, and like Lola to me. So I also felt like she didn't have her own children to remember her. So I felt like I wanted to do something to make sure that she was remembered. So randomly, I Googled her name, Emma Unson Rotor, and nothing. Well, not nothing, because her husband has a really big footprint. Back in 2018, he already had his own Wikipedia page, which says he is widely considered among the best Filipino short story writers of the 20th century. So people do their dissertations on Lolo Arturo's writing. He was also chief of staff of President Osmeña in exile during the Second World War. He had both an orchid and a disease named after him. And I was so irritated because Lola Emma was such a fantastic and incredible woman, but she was overshadowed by this person who was her husband. She was, just teaching college math and physics. So I decided that this was going to be my first family portrait. And the working title was Maalala, which in Tagalog means to remember. So this is how I remember her from my childhood. And this is the painting that I did of her. Ultimately, it was called eminence gris, which is a term used to refer to a person who exercises power or influence in a certain sphere without holding an official position. And it's a painted book that is actually in this shadow box that you can open, and it's two spreads of a book. The initial view was this, where she's obstructed by all these items on her husband's CV. And the little piece on there is a fuse, because one of my all-time favorite stories of Lola Emma, this is family lore, was that she worked on the Manhattan Project while her husband was in medical school at Johns Hopkins. So my dad asked her at a party, Tita, auntie, is it true that you worked on the bomb? And I imagine her looking just like this when she whispers back, oh no, not the bomb. I worked on the fuse. So I gave this portrait to my Aunt Delia for her birthday because they were really close, and that was in December of 2018. And then just 3 months later, March 2019, we went to Mexico for a spring break together, so my aunt and I. And while we're on the beach, she's checking her phone, she turns to me and says, I got this really strange email. And the subject line said, "Are you related to Emma Unson Rator?" And the email was from Dr. E.R. Tiongsun, who is a researcher at Georgetown, who had discovered evidence that her fuse story was actually true. So through ER, I learned that not only had Emma designed the proximity fuse, which is what made the atom bomb functionally possible, because it allowed you to detonate not on impact, like it could wait. But this intricate technology is what led to the development of miniaturized electronics like portable radios and eventually things like AirPods. So Dr. Tiongsun was working on this story not about Arturo, but about Emma. And he asked to interview us and asked us for pictures. So we sent him this one, and in September of 2023, his article was published in Science News. And then shortly thereafter, I was interviewed by the Lost Women of Science podcast, and this story went viral. So it was picked up by media here and in the Philippines. So someone made this illustration of Lola Emma, and then the podcast was just translated into Spanish, like literally a week ago. The story was featured by the Philippine Embassy in DC for Women's History Month, the University of the Philippines, and then at a high school in the Philippines, someone cosplayed as Emma for Math Day, which is pretty awesome. She has her own Wikipedia page now. That is longer than Lolo Arturo's. Now, I know that it's likely that Dr. Tiongsun had already begun this research by the time I was inspired to Google her name back in 2018 and paint her portrait. But it's really fun to think that I cast this spell that would make sure that she was remembered. So, back in 2021, we were still, 2020, we were still in lockdown. I decided to take a week off from work. No, it was 2021, sorry. And do this virtual residency at Cel de Nord, which physically is based outside of Barcelona. So we were asked to write our intentions about the residency, and weirdly, I wrote, "I want to build a time machine." And I think it was because of the pictures, the feeling of how much was lost with the passage of time and the memories that were kind of locked away in people who were long dead, right? Like this man, Ramon Ochoa. So he was my great-grandfather. All I knew about him from my family was that he had been a captain in the Philippine Constabulary and that he had studied in the States as a pensionado. So this was a scholarship program that was established by William Taft, yes, future US president. At the time, he was the Governor General of the Philippines. This painting used to hang in my grandparents' house, and now it hangs in mine. So all of these artifacts, the images, the painting, made me really miss my family, none of which live here in St. Louis. So my children were practically grown by then, and soon I wouldn't really have a reason to stay. Why was I even here was what I had said out loud to myself. I was walking from my house to my office. And mere days after that, again on the Google, I typed in the name, Ramon Ochoa, and this image came up. So it was of the pensionados, and I'm like, wait, I recognize, what is that? Why do I recognize that? And if I had any doubts at all, the document from which I found the image basically had left me no doubt, because it is in fact the steps of Festival Hall at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. This discovery is what began my travels through time. I had so many questions. Why was he here? Why was there this giant display of the Philippines at this fair in St. Louis? So these questions led me down this rabbit hole. It was kind of surreal. I'm going to try to give you the backstory really quickly. Ramon was brought here in 1904 as part of the pensionado program that Taft established to sponsor cohorts of Filipino boys from prominent families in the Philippines to be educated in the US. So in exchange, once they graduated, they would go back to the Philippines and fill positions in the colonial government. So this is what President McKinley called the benevolent assimilation policy, at least part of it. And this was a direct quote from Taft. Taft argued that the fair would exert a very great influence in completing the pacification of the Philippines by creating a cadre of Filipinos who would be informed about the wonders of modern civilization and overawed by its inexorability. So Walter Johnson, who's this researcher at Harvard, he wrote The Broken Heart of America, said that it was an act of psychological warfare. So all of this is kind of assuming that you know that the fair came on the heels of the Philippine-American War, started in 1899 to 1902, and then the Philippines was actually an American territory until 1946. So before they were shipped out to all these different colleges, the pensionados were assigned to serve as guides in the Philippine reservation, and they were kind of placed there for the optics, basically, to serve as foils for the 40 indigenous tribes that were displayed as savages. So because they spoke English, see how this is a theme, and were dressed in Western suits, they illustrated to the fairgoers how easily Filipinos could be civilized. And look how the American occupation had already improved them. So I don't want to digress too much into this history because that's the topic of another talk, as much as the thing that happened to me, and that is the veil that was lifted in my own consciousness, this realization that the reason that I'm here, the reason that I chose to come, the reason that I am someone who looks like this but talks like this, is a direct and intentional result of the agenda of William Taft, President McKinley, and David Francis, who was head of the Fair Commission. So because of the pensionados, my grandfather was in fact part of that cadre of Filipinos who were informed of the wonders of Western civilization, the superiority of English as a language, and the superiority of US's system of education. So much so that he raised his children to speak only American English at home. His daughter was my grandmother, who he named Daisy, which is not a typical Filipino name. She spoke with an American accent, and remember, she was also a guide for the US Army after the fall of Manila in 1946, because she was so understandable and Americanized. So she studied English at the University of the Philippines. She used to tell me on repeat how lucky we were to be the only country in Asia to speak English, which of course, now we know is because of 47 years of occupation and cultural erasure. So 2 of her children came to the US for their post-secondary education, and I thought I had made the choice to emigrate because didn't everyone? But definitely not just my great-grandfather's lineage. This precedence had already been set for me, before me, in 1904. By overlaying this map of the fair with a contemporary Google map, I figured out that I actually lived on the same land that Lolo Ramon had walked on in 1904. My kids went to the school that now sits on the former grounds of the Philippine reservation. Their mascot used to be the Waidown Igorots, and my office is now across the street in a job promoting American higher education. So in 2020, COVID, and like most people, I replaced showering and commuting with hobbies. Mine was doing more research in the online archives of the Library of Congress and the Missouri Historical Society, and I discovered that Olmsted, the architect who originally designed WashU's campus, where I work, collaborated with Burnham on the design of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Burnham also came up with the designs for, anybody guess? The city of Manila and Baguio. There's Burnham Park in Chicago and Baguio, a city in the Cordillera Mountains, which was the American summer palace in the Philippines and also the ancestral lands of several Igorot ethnic groups. So, A little strange that I ended up in a city that my family only knew of because of the Judy Garland movie. But then I discovered to be also historically linked with my birth city. The connection between the two was because St. Louis's heyday was in 1904, turn of the century, marked by the World's Fair, but it was also the moment when America chose to become an empire by colonizing the Philippines. So there's still the randomness of having met someone from St. Louis, though. Perhaps I was always coming. So in college, I had a professor and a mentor who once told me, "You're skilled at your craft, but you don't have anything to say." I didn't know enough to be offended. I just accepted that it was true. Why would anyone care about what I had to say? During one of those residency critiques, I said that. Why would anyone care? And one of the other participants said, "That's just colonialism. That's what they want you to think." So I came back from that virtual residency to make art, even if no one saw a single piece. They were my time machines. With art, I could bend time. Unlike the written word, which is, one word in front of the next in progression, this happened and then this happened, whatever. 100 years, I can show you 100 years right here. It's literally a portal. When everything in here can exist at the same time, communicated all at once. So it doesn't have the temporal baggage of language. So I kind of, for myself, love living in that liminal space as part of the process of making this work. So fast forward now through a series of synchronicities and chance meetings and random events that gave me all of these opportunities to share my art. So my sister-in-law comes, I guess that was 2019, standing next to a man at the History Museum. She starts telling him my story. That man, Marvin, turns out to be a curator who 2 years later invites me to participate in a panel at the Soldiers Memorial, or actually it was virtual, but for the Soldiers Memorial on the legacy of Manifest Destiny. So that recording was shared with other folks at the History Museum, and that is how I got invited to be part of the new permanent exhibit. The recording was also shared with a professor at WashU, Dave Walsh, as part of the American Culture Studies program, who invited me to do a guest lecture in his World's Fair class at WashU, which is amazing, and I've learned so much from him. Art-wise, I was making all these painted books, so I had a friend who introduced me to Vanessa, because she was the curator at the Angat at the time, and I knew they had a library. So I thought, oh, maybe she'll hang a piece up in the library. But instead, she gave me the whole first floor. So I had to make all of this work that didn't exist. I painted all the family portraits, and Vanessa was inspired to hang it like a family gallery. So walking into the space for the first time, I was surrounded by my ancestors, and it was truly, truly surreal and magical. And I think because of On God, someone reached out from the Post-Dispatch. So I was featured in the Post-Dispatch, and there was more press with the History Museum press tour. I got to write a chapter in this book and kind of snowballed from there. And I was in the New York Times, and I was also at doing the speakers tour with the Missouri speakers tour, and then I did a lot of talks with the St. Louis Public Library and the County Library. One of those talks, totally random, again, I'm doing my thing, and this person in the audience says, "I think my great-great-great-grandfather was in that class of pensionados." I was like, "What's your name?" "Oh yeah, he was." Super weird. I was invited to do another show at Coca this time. Look at all these familiar faces. And their space gave me this idea to paint portraits of my Filipino friends and project images from the World's Fair onto these portraits to illustrate how perceptions of Filipino Americans continue to be distorted by projections from the past. I'm invited to speak at different things at this panel at WashU. This is significant because this is Jeff Ward. I don't know if anybody knows Jeff Ward, but during COVID, I listened to him on a CAM podcast, and I didn't say, oh, I want to meet this person. I said, oh, I want to collaborate with this person. And then at some point in the future, he reached out to me. And I've also done guest lectures with him in his classes, and in one of those, he also brought in Walter Johnson, who wrote The Broken Heart of America. So I got to meet him too. This happens again and again, right? So I'm listening to this Modern Art Notes podcast, and there's an episode with Kate LeMay, who is the curator at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. She's talking about her new exhibition called 1898, U.S. Imperial Visions and Revisions. So on a whim, I buy a ticket to DC to see it, because there's like a portrait of Emilio Aguinaldo, who's the first president of the Philippine Republic, in there on loan at the Smithsonian. Couldn't pass it up, right? So Dr. G introduces me to Tessa, who is also going, you gotta meet my friend. So I meet her for breakfast. I've never met her before, but we have a great breakfast. She's like, come with me, I'm by myself. So we go back to the Smithsonian, and she's speaking. She's speaking at the symposium. So since I'm with her, I get kind of swept up into the speaker's lounge, and I meet Kate LeMay. Now we're besties now. Because of my art, everyone just assumes that I'm a speaker too, which is how I end up at this table for dinner with all the preeminent scholars of Filipino-American history. This is Patrick Flores. He just curated the Singapore Biennale. No big deal. So because of Mohist again, I end up on the press tour, and I'm on PBS, and I'm in the New York Times, and I'm just so grateful for all of these opportunities to be able to contextualize the fair in a different way than just, Ferris wheels and ice cream cones. But I knew that this anniversary was coming up. I wanted more room to tell this story. So in 2021, when I was selected to do the Lambert Show at the Kling Family Gallery, I asked for it to be scheduled in 2024. So I wanted the space to tell this alternate history, to commemorate the fair in a different way. So I made a few new pieces for that show. This centerpiece is called Foundations, and it's an installation of portraits that I painted of my friends' parents. The first gens, the ones who uprooted their lives in the Philippines and became the foundation for the thriving Filipino community that we have here today. The bricks, St. Louis, Brick City, and the clay was extracted from this region and molded into the foundational material for buildings across the country. So you can kind of see the parallels there. The bricks I selected were century bricks, so they were actually forged by the hydraulic press company at the turn of the century. I arranged them in a circle, and I built this display so that they would be at eye level, which meant that in order to see the subject's faces, you had to look past what appeared like bars of gold. So the coolest thing about this is that the people came. So this is Tessie, Tita Tessie, and this is her. And this is Tita Isabel, who's also one of the portraits. And it was a full circle moment, a different way to reclaim the meaning of the phrase Filipinos in St. Louis, because for so long it meant dog-eating savages. And now it can look like this. Okay, one last story, which is this triptych here, is called Transmission 1, 2, and 3. Because when I was writing my chapter for the World's Fair, Dave Walsh was writing his on technology and how our technology embodies our values. So in the background is the DeForest Wireless Tower. In 1904 at the fair, that was the projection of the future. A future that embraced capitalism and consumerism, and with it, productivity, speed, efficiency, and progress at whatever the cost. So this is the future that we all live in and live with today. So I started with the tower, but I want an alternative to the trap, to the grind, to the extraction of our humanness to the machine. So in what ways have we transmitted our values as humans since the beginning of time? Through our genes, through our lineage, through our families, and through our stories. So this is my grandfather with his parents in the 1930s, and the middle one was him with his wife and eldest son, which is my dad, and the third one is with me. So at the World's Fair, people could tap out messages from St. Louis to Chicago in an instant, which seemed like magic. In 1984, my Lolo wrote this letter, and his message is, "We will be with you in spirit all the days of your life." That's magic. So as I was making this piece, I was stitching this Morse code that goes across all three pieces. And I happened to be listening to Babel by R.F. Kuang. I don't know if you've read it. It's awesome. I'm literally using a upholstery needle and as I'm doing this, the audio book says, in 1844, a man named Samuel Morse invented Morse code. Like, what is happening right now? What I take away from all these synchronicities in my practice of art making is now being able to trust more and be more generous with my own creative process. So as a young art student, I didn't give myself permission to claim art for many reasons. But similar to the other values that I inherited through my culture's colonial past, part of it was this misperception of worth being tied to commercial viability. A false premise that art is only worth making or doing if you can monetize it. Some people do, like our wonderful friends at One's Films, but that doesn't have to be the reason to make art. The magic of those moments is that it makes me feel like my work is connected to other people, to other people's art, like Vanessa's or Dave Walsh's or Walter Johnson's. Like Yo-Yo Ma says, the magic is in between the notes. So I want to end with this quote, which came up on my feed just as I was wrapping up this presentation. It's from Louise Miller, who's an author and a baker. "I'm almost 50, and here's the best thing I've learned so far. Every strange thing you've ever been into, every failed hobby or forgotten instrument, everything you've learned will come back to you and will serve you when you need it. No love, however brief, is wasted." The end. To be continued.